When men and women walk into a setting like this, we must walk with care. Of all the forces on Earth, only man is capable of cutting down a sequoia, and only man is capable of fully appreciating its beauty.
I've been in the business 45 years. This is the worst fire conditions I've ever fought fire in. We got a massive fire, Santa Ana conditions, burning multiple houses. We got multiple burn victims, and this is the third fatality I've seen this morning.
The year 2002 saw over 84,000 wildfires burn roughly 7 million acres of land. As 2003 drew to a close, another 3.8 million acres would be claimed by fire. No state faced more destruction than California, which bore almost 3/4 of the structural damage, costing around $250 million. Although witnessing the unprecedented destruction in California was in large part responsible for the public outcry regarding wildfire safety, the rate and severity of forest fires had been steadily increasing for decades, necessitating government action.
Met some families here that are obviously crushed by the material loss, and they look forward to rebuilding and rebuilding their lives. And the role of government, the federal government, the state government, the local government is helping as best as we can.
President Bush was driven into the fiery destruction that claimed 90% of
To face the widespread concern, George W. Bush launched the Healthy Forest Initiative, a plan to protect communities and wilderness by mitigating forest fires. One of the most essential aspects of this initiative was the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. Passed on December 3rd of 2003, this act provided new regulations to allow the government to better prevent fire damage. Although this act was intended to help communities while also improving environmental conditions, the success of the legislation has been disputed by environmentalists and activists, calling the changes made under the act insufficient or even harmful. The HFRA was most harshly criticized for the standard by which it authorized hazardous fuel reduction. Hazardous fuel is living and deceased vegetation that contributes to the growth and spread of wildfires. Past efforts to clear hazardous fuel from forests have proven effective. However, critics of the legislation argue that the criteria for what vegetation was removable was far too inclusive. They argued that the new standards gave private timber companies greater opportunities to log, increasing deforestation. Section 102 of the Act defines what constitutes hazardous fuel. Included in this list are trees that have been damaged by insects or disease, trees that are at risk of being damaged by insects or disease, trees and land that could contaminate municipal water supply if damaged by fire. Even land that houses endangered species could be subject to logging under certain conditions. However, logging under the FHRA was not unrestricted. The total amount of land that could be authorized for hazardous fuel reduction projects was limited to 20 million acres. Projects could be restricted on components of natural wilderness preservation systems, wilderness study areas, or federal land where certain vegetation is prohibited from being removed.
There's a better day ahead. That today your life may look dismal, but tomorrow life's going to be better. And to the extent that the federal government can help you, we want to do so.
Another noted flaw of the HFRA was its promotion of clear cutting as the preferred method of tree removal. Clear cutting is a process in which most or all of the trees in a designated area are cut down at the same time. Unfortunately, clear cutting is extremely damaging to the land. Removing trees en masse alters habitats for organisms living in the forest, which can destroy ecosystems. The removal of trees also increases soil erosion and runoff, damaging the land further. Although clear cutting is never directly addressed in the HFRA, in order to remove all of the hazardous fuel outlined in the bill, large sections of forest will need to be completely stripped of trees, requiring clear cutting to be performed. A better method of tree removal is selective cutting, in which a portion of the trees in an area are removed in staggered amounts. Using this method, new trees can regrow and an area of forest is never depleted of trees, greatly reducing the negative impact on the environment.
I see human tragedy and heartache. I see the loss of a lot of material possessions. However, I see a strong spirit which exists here. Neighbors do care about neighbors, and people are helping people here.
With each new forest fire upending more and more communities, the HFRA needed the courts to approve as many of the hazardous fuel reduction projects as possible, and as soon as possible. Section 106 makes several changes to the judicial review process of these projects. These include limiting judicial review of the projects to U.S. district courts in the same district as the federal land where the projects would take place, and asking courts to expedite decisions regarding complaints against these projects. Injunctions or injunctive reliefs are court orders demanding the termination of a certain action. The court reviews one party's complaint, and if it agrees, it will command the party responsible for the complaint to stop. If an injunction were to be brought against a hazardous fuel reduction project, Section 106 calls for the review process to take a maximum of 60 days. For an injunction to be reviewed, the court would need to hear both parties re-argue their positions and consider whether the harm of the project would outweigh the benefit.
To assess the needs, to listen to the concerns, and to respond. And that's exactly what we've been doing, and that's exactly what we'll continue to do.
I moved from my parents' house to this house. I don't even know what it's like to move.
While many different sources of opinion will argue about the content of the HFRA, the best way to evaluate the Act's actual impact is to consider whether or not the bill was successful in meeting its established goals. Regarding the prevention of wildfires, data would suggest that the bill was not. In the 3 years preceding the HFRA, the National Interagency Fire Center reports the number of wildfires as 84,000 in 2001, 73,000 in 2002, and 63,000 in 2003. In the following 3 years, reported wildfires increased at 65,000 in 2004, 66,000 in 2005, and 96,000 in 2006. The number of wildfires recorded in 2006 was the highest ever recorded since federal agencies began calculating annual wildfires in 1983. The total number of acres burned per year saw an even sharper increase, from slightly under 4 million acres in 2003 to over 8 million acres in both 2004 and 2005.
After speaking with several more families who lost it all, America's leader offered these thoughts about the community.
I suspect the citizens here who are at the darkest moments will find light when a fellow citizen loves them. And the response, as I understand, in this neighborhood has been terrific, where people have come together.
The annual wildfire reports appear to suggest little correlation between the passing of the HFRA and reduced fires. However, forest fires have been rising for years, as warmer winters and hotter, dry summers have fostered forest conditions to become more and more prone to fire. While the Bush administration jumped in quickly to address the widespread fear of wildfire damage, a different environmental concern was gathering its own attention.
Confronting global climate change.
The world is in danger. Scientists are now warning that the danger is from man himself. The danger was spelled out.
On June 23, 1988, former director of NASA's Institute of Space Studies James Hansen testified before the Energy and Natural Resources Committee of the U.S. Senate regarding the impending threat of global warming. Hansen's warnings, along with breakthrough scientific research, went with bipartisan alarm, turning the mostly unknown phenomenon into an international emergency.
Well, I think in 1988, when I testified, I think most scientists probably agreed that the evidence was beginning to appear that humans were affecting the climate. But scientists by nature tend to be very cautious, and we're not ready to make a strong statement. But the difficulty with this issue is that if you wait too long, then there are many effects that will be in the pipeline, and then it's impossible to avoid the consequences.
The governor said that he doesn't think this problem is necessarily caused by people. He's for letting the oil companies into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Houston's just become the smoggiest city in the country, and Texas is #1 in industrial pollution.
Less than 9 years following Hansen's testimony, over 150 nations met in Kyoto, Japan to form an international treaty that would commit developed nations to limiting their greenhouse gas emissions. Adopted on December 11th of 1997, the Kyoto Protocol committed 37 developed countries as well as the European Economic Union to nation-specific emission restrictions that would become effective on February 16th of 2005. Among these participants was the United States, signing under the Bill Clinton administration.
I am very pleased that the United States has reached a truly historic agreement with other nations of the world to take unprecedented steps to address the global problem of climate change.
Despite the nation's previous commitments, however, President Bush decided to pull the United States from the Kyoto Protocol in what would be one of, if not his most controversial environmental decisions during office. On June 11, 2001, Bush addressed a small crowd of reporters on the White House Rose Garden. There he explained the main reasons for withdrawing from the agreement.
Good morning. I've just met with senior members of my administration who are working to develop an effective and science-based approach to addressing the important issue of global climate change.
Bush's main reason for opposing the Kyoto Protocol was to protect the economy. In order to reduce the amount of U.S. emissions, the federal government would need to impose strict regulations on private businesses, an action that would definitely hurt the economy. While many saw this as a necessary step to address the impending danger of global warming, Bush disagreed for multiple reasons. At the time Bush was forced to make his decision regarding the protocol, relatively little was known about either the reasons behind or the effects of climate change. He expressed concern that the commitment to the protocol would be almost guaranteed to hurt Americans, while it would not necessarily provide an adequate solution to the problem of climate change. Instead, he proposed that the nation should postpone any risky decisions until more was known about the science regarding climate change. Meanwhile, using advances in science and technology, as well as time to further improve the economy to better prepare the nation to combat global warming more effectively when the time did come.
But to protesters outside, this was more about avoiding action than anything else.
It's really not surprising to me. The whole time he's been president, he's done nothing except work against the environment, and to see him basically leave it voluntary, it's because he doesn't want to do anything. He really just doesn't want to work on this with the rest of the world.
Not only would government regulations detract from the success of industries, but the protocol would also place the U.S. at a disadvantage against foreign countries, especially developing nations that compete with the U.S. The creators of the Kyoto Protocol acknowledged the negative impacts binding emission restrictions could have, and for that reason they limited the restrictions to developed nations that were not in the process of trying to improve their economy. And advocates of the treaty noted that because it mainly targeted developed nations, some of the top polluters were excluded from restrictions such as India and China. At the time, China was the second highest polluting country. It would soon become the highest. Even President Clinton was aware of this problem at the time the treaty was signed.
There are still hard challenges ahead, especially in the area of involvement by the developing nations. It's essential that they participate in a meaningful way if we are to truly tackle this problem. But the joint implementation provisions of the agreement open the way to that result. The industrialized nations have come together and taken a strong step, and that is real progress.
It is important to understand that George Bush was by no means a denier or a skeptic of climate change. He acknowledged rising temperatures and called for the U.S. to take precautionary measures to do their part and reduce emissions. What ultimately prevented Bush from supporting the Kyoto Protocol was his concern that the agreement's potential future benefits would not outweigh the immediate negative results.
First, we know the surface temperature of the Earth is warming. It has risen by 0.6 degrees Celsius over the past 100 years. There was a warming trend from the 1890s to the 1940s, cooling from the 1940s to the 1970s, and then sharply rising temperatures from the 1970s to today.
Research that would emerge in the years following 2001 would also suggest that climate change would be one of the most important threats facing Earth. Despite this, at the time of his decision, Bush's uncertainty about the need to take such extensive action was relatively consistent with public opinion and the extent of scientific information available.
Each nation must decide for itself the right mix of tools and technologies to achieve results that are measurable and environmentally effective.
Still, many condemn Bush's decision. Although Bush emphasized the importance of corporations reducing their pollution, many feared that without legally imposed restrictions, suggested measures would be ineffective. Some would go as far as to call Bush's withdrawal as a sign that he was not truly interested in protecting the environment, criticizing his tendency to shift the responsibility from the government to the individual.
Indeed, the top British envoy here dismissed voluntary limits on greenhouse gases as about as effective as a voluntary speed limit sign.
Even though the United States did not follow through on the Kyoto Protocol, Bush did take measures to reduce U.S. emissions. In February of 2002, the administration set the U.S. on a goal to reduce emissions by 18% by the year 2012. The plan would stop more than 500 million metric tons of carbon from being released. Yes, Bush did support leaving industries in charge of their environmental practices instead of imposing government regulation. But, despite this criticism, this did not mean that Bush was ignoring the problem. In 2005, Bush passed the Energy Policy Act, which allocated $5 billion to provide tax incentives for industries to pursue efficient and renewable energy. In 2002, the Department of Energy launched the Climate Change Technology Program, which used advancing technology to find ways to reduce emissions. As promised, Bush did listen to new research and information about global warming, using science's developing understanding of the problem to improve the nation's response. He continued to work with foreign nations, meeting with foreign leaders, and attending the G8 summit. So, was George Bush a beneficial president for the environment? At times he was, and at times he was not. While passing the Healthy Forest Restoration Act and withdrawing the United States from the Kyoto Protocol are two very controversial decisions, Bush's environmental policy ranged from strong support to strong opposition. From designating over 200,000 acres of the Pacific Ocean as protected areas, a decision widely praised by environmentalists, to removing endangered species from the endangered species list, a decision widely criticized, Bush's actions proved to be hit or miss for the different interests of the American people. Bush claimed that he did care about the environment, so why were his actions regarding climate change and fire protection sometimes supported by environmentalists, while other times not? Why is it that sometimes Bush took action that protected the environment, while other times his actions hurt it? The reason is that environmental policy is not solely dictated by how much those responsible for the policy care about the environment. Environmental policy has not only environmental impacts, but also economic, social, health-related, and political impacts that must be taken into consideration to determine if the policy will overall benefit the nation. Despite action, global warming and forest fires are still an unresolved problem. As the United States and the rest of the world are faced with worsening environmental conditions, it is essential that leaders continue to act in the best interest of their constituents, while understanding that in order to accomplish this, they must protect the world that we will all inhabit for lifetimes to come.
God bless you all. God bless America.